All right, because I didn't introduce myself the last presentation I did, I'm Tom.
I'm Matt.
Robert.
Everhart.
Yeah, we work at VCU. We're going to talk to you a little bit about multivariate, nonlinear project non-management. I may in this presentation make fun of some things that you do, or want to do, or have considered seriously, and we'll also be making fun of stuff that we've done, both by choice and by force. So we'll start off here with this idea of project planning. This is an actual document given to us by somebody we work with, and I think none of it actually is true. So as we've been through the project, despite them taking the time to do this in a variety of different ways, I don't know if it was accurate at all, let alone a great way to guide things. And you'll also have people trying to commit you to various religions, Scrum, Sprints, Waterfalls, Agiles, all sorts of different things that are going to guarantee you productivity. And with design thinking will also guarantee you creativity and inspiration and all sorts of good stuff. And I think what we're trying to do here, right? Outcomes, consistency, certainty. If we have enough structures in place and we commit to it with enough religion and enough software backing it up, and we have our stand-up meetings, we have our sit-down meetings, all of this will equal projects that are under-promised and over-delivered. I think that was a thing we were told to guarantee, like a guiding principle: under-promise and over-deliver. And this is kind of how I feel about this, right? It's a trap. It's bait. It is the poison apple, right? If you're doing anything aspirational in this space, you're not going to know all of this stuff. You're not going to be able to say exactly what it is. Any project we've done of any worth, I've had chunks of it that I wasn't sure how I was going to do it, let alone I'd be able to do it, by sprint 3. And that's scary. And that's not the way we're setting up higher ed to support things right now necessarily, but there is that idea of growth and trying to do something different. And just to tell you all a little bit about ourselves, we're 3 people. We work in one physical office, but we work with lots of different groups. Matt and Jeff are out of the office working from home part of the time. We use these tools to communicate. We write on walls a lot. So despite building a lot of digital things, we find a lot of value in actually just drawing stuff out in a big space, right? Nothing fancy there, but it's part of how we do it. And you'll also note that I take pictures of it. So not something you see in a lot of books, but a method that works for us.
Occasionally your project management system might get erased by the air.
That's true, yes.
Trying to clean our space.
We did have the cleaning service erase our board, despite the do not erase thing.
Hence the pictures.
Yes. Luckily it doesn't erase all that well. Yeah. And we handle a fair amount of stuff. This is partly just to say, you can do this sort of fairly loose project management in a fairly complex environment. So we run this multi-site. We do all the student support. It's hosted on Reclaim servers, but we deal with a number of other servers. We support a bunch of stuff. We build things. We do workshops. We do faculty consultations. We do online stuff. We do lots of things. We do PR sites now sometimes. So we do a lot of different projects with a lot of different people. And that's just to say, we have a lot of stuff going on. You go to our GitHub site, you'll see a lot of repositories. And that's in addition to lots of stuff that never makes it there. So I just say that because busy is busy, right? And we fell into this trap of overstructuring. So when I make fun of things, I'm making fun of us too. Because in the end, it was kind of this: prime directive, cover your ass, right? Make sure you have documentation of all this stuff so you can't get in trouble. We've had a couple leadership shifts. We were kind of, well, I certainly was paranoid about like saying like, are we doing enough stuff and can we prove it and can we make sure people are happy, which gets into that under-promising stuff, right? And I think it also fits into these concepts about how we're doing education right now. We want certainty over surprise or amazingness. We want consistency rather than like working harder at different things. We want scale of this rather than quality, right? This is kind of how I feel, kind of being dragged down. So this was our initial setup for every project. We had this all automated too, which is the truly terrifying part. So we would initiate a project in a WordPress repository or install. It would create a Google Drive folder, which duplicated a templated project document, created a Slack channel, installed a GitHub repo, created a hashtag, and all of the emails with that hashtag were logged in the Google spreadsheet. It is so dumb.
So, and I think the best part about this is there was no like push for us to do anything.
No, we did this.
But both Matt and I started, I guess, at VCU about 2 years ago, and so I think we all sat down and were like, how do we want to work? And this is what we came up with, which I think has great intentions, but at the same time, I mean, talk about complexity.
Yeah, so this was what the website would then do. It'd be like, all right, here's the start date, which is set in the, like through a metadata field in the WordPress post. Here are the emails that have been written, and this was all being aggregated publicly. The bytes of code, you know what I mean? So like, it was fun, but it was like
fluff. Yeah.
It was stupid, and like that number got so big, I needed to do, you know. So I mean, like we were tracking like all sorts of crazy stuff.
Channeling Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, like they didn't stop to wonder why.
Yeah,
They're too busy.
You thought you could.
That's right.
If you should.
And even now, when we look back at it, we're like, some of this stuff was pretty neat.
Yeah.
You know, like we almost, you know, it's fun, but is it doing anything? I mean, like this is kind of what we're doing, right? Jumping through hoops, creating data that no one wanted to look at and that didn't really do anything to further our mission or make us like better at doing this stuff, right? I should have done this in some sort of mathematical language, but I didn't because I was lazy. This is the kind of thing that happens in institutions all the time. I mean, I've created weekly updates that I was sending to my supervisors, and because I did in Google Docs as part of our Who's Creepy, I could check and see if they ever opened them, and they didn't. So I was writing weekly reports of our progress, trying to be like proactive with these new people, sending this stuff out, and then looking, you know, months later they'd never been opened, and feeling, you know, dumber and dumber about some of this stuff. And this is kind of how it can feel sometimes, right? Like when you're trying to decide what to track and how to organize things, that you can have like a couple things, but not all the things. And we kind of came down to like, it is about balance and finding these right paths. And we have a couple, I guess, general rules. The more people involved in a project, usually the less work that actually gets done. So when we can, we keep these projects as small as possible. We'll talk about what happens when you have a lot of people and a lot of institutions in a minute. This is another kind of key one. Like, if you don't have the actual person who's the final decider in the room, the distance from Kevin Bacon, like, the further that distance is, the more miserable the experience will be for everyone. The worst is when you get like a, yes. What? I don't even have Flash. Sorry about that. That's the deal. Get the decision maker in the room. Because if you have a graduate assistant or, you know, somebody who reports to the super magical dean of this or that or the other thing, those people will never make decisions. They'll be trying to interpret the dreams and the animal entrails of something and mystically divining what they want, and it never works out well. We avoid long deadlines. We often run into scenarios where somebody's like, well, I need this in like 2 months, and we're like, well, can we make the thing in a week? Because things expand and fill, and they make giant work when you give them too much time, right? So we want to make it real. We want to make it sooner. And if necessary, we'll make it iteratively. All right. This is essentially what we've broken down for our project. So we want to set the purpose right off. We want a final due date, priority of stuff we need to have made. And then this is something especially important. Like in the past, we usually would come to people with how we were going to communicate it. We moved much more to like, how do you do stuff now for the person who's kind of the client, so to speak. So we shift our pattern of communication to the one they're most comfortable with. We might make suggestions if they want to know like how to do a certain thing or how should we do this particular part, but we want it to be centered around the way they do it. Because if you try and force somebody into your patterns and tools, that's pretty miserable for everybody. And then set these short-term due dates and cycle through them. And Matt's going to talk about this beautiful site, which was with biology professor Dan Carr.
Yeah, so this was probably one of the best examples of where we had due dates. I had the person who was in charge, who was basically in charge of the site. I was direct communication with him. We decided to communicate around a platform. We all have G Suite, so it was very easy to open a Google Doc and through email to communicate. So I had sort of the best scenario of working with a professor to create this site. And he also had very an open-ended, like, do what you want to do, which was great, which sometimes can be troublesome, but he liked what we did, and it was a great process to go through this with him. Again, it was a single person who I had to deal with. We also had, this particular site is he takes students out on the James River, and they do this trip for, I think, 3 weeks. And so part of this was we had a due date because we had the trip started and actually just finished up this last week. So that worked pretty well because we had to have deadlines, we had to have, the site had to be ready, had to accept submissions, and it was just a very easy process. And this is just one example that I got the easy one because this was actually worked really well. It was very pleasant to work on this with them. Again, we're able to do some pretty amazing things when given the chance and have people buy into the process too. So we did this in really just a couple of months, but it really could have been done in a couple of weeks. It just took some time to get everything, all the pieces and parts ready, because we didn't have to have it ready immediately. So this was a very pleasant thing to work on.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Dan Carr is the kind of biologist who wanders off into the woods for chunks of time and then comes back.
Yes, there was some gaps, as there was mentioned in email gaps, but generally it was like we knew we had a target date, and there's some things too. To just kind of talk about this site. Dan is going out and taking. He's supposed to take some pictures and some 3D camera work that we're going to try to do later to kind of keep adding and make it iterative to this site. So we'll be. Hopefully he's captured some really cool stuff, and like I said, we just actually got back last Friday from the trip, so this will be a fun one to kind of keep going.
So it's a nice equity of work as well, like there's students and faculty creating beautiful media. It's being integrated in as an initial pitch, and then what Matt's talking about is they're going to continue to capture stuff, feed it in here, and kind of keep the site growing. So that keeps him kind of engaged with it, keeps him thinking through both, I'd say, the physical and the digital representation of these things. And then you work mainly in Google Docs.
We did,
Did you see how many revisions you ended up having?
Yeah, we took Tom is just saying, take a look back at, I don't know if you've got the plugin you can use, Draft Back, so you can kind of see all the different iterations. But it was nice just seeing our two names on there, just making the corrections. But it was fairly substantial. But again, it was like a 2-month time, so it wasn't crazy. I think you've demonstrated and shown some more that were pretty incredible.
If y'all have questions as we go through this, you can hit them up now, or we can wait to the end, whatever you want.
Yeah, and this is just a WordPress site. We did some custom work here. posted on our RAM pages.
You brought up a good point about like you're going to be adding stuff later, and so I wonder, and maybe if you're going to talk about it later or at any point about the maintenance aspect of the various projects, because that's something that I find I always forget to build in. Like you're like, oh, we're going to work on this thing, and then it'll be done, right? And you don't really think about like that it's ever not really done, you know. And so then your workload continues. You start to build like these big packs over your back of all the things that you've done, good stuff, but that you're continuing to maintain. So I wonder how you all factor in that maintenance factor.
I don't know that we do a great job of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we talk about that a lot, where we'll look up at the wall and be like, oh, we got all these things going on, or, you know, maybe we don't and there's only a few things up there. So I would say that we don't typically consider the stuff that never ends.
Right.
And I don't know how, so if anybody here has a great idea of how you like conceptualize that, you know.
We had the land of completion, right?
Yeah.
Which is false, because some of the things were just like in perpetuity.
Yeah.
They would come back and
Yes.
you know, continue to bite us again and again like that zombie.
Zombies. Yeah. I don't
We
think
need a
any
zombie
stuff
project,
ever
right?
ends.
Yeah, I would think some of the stuff maybe where it's built for a specific class or it has a really short lifespan. There are things like that I think we do and then maybe go away. But typically it's cyclical, where we might build it and then, you know, next time we run it, they run that class again, we just reuse the thing. So I think that is one thing we try and do really well, is we try and package things for reuse so that if it comes up again, we can spin whatever it is up in minutes or hours instead of days.
So I know you guys are kind of more on the technical side of implementing these projects, but I was wondering, you know, for maybe a new domain of one's own school or a new school that's trying to grow a WordPress multi-site on campus or something, you mentioned, you know, not setting long deadlines, which I understand in this mindset. I agree, if you draw things out, it never gets done. So I do understand that, but for some of these projects, you know, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You know, it requires years or months of, okay, workshop here, do this here, and I'm wondering how you maybe balance that and encourage growth, but also still set, I guess, deadlines that, you know, without biting off more than you can chew.
Yeah, and I think you're talking about
Which is probably two different
entwined things, like
Yeah.
cultural change and organizational like shifts, as well as like making a single thing.
Right.
And they're entwined, right? Like, because I mean, partly some of this is driven by like, you know, at Domains 2017, it was just me. So this was right before I think they all
Right.
started.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have like 2 extra people. It's like, ooh, we can do anything. You know, like we have, you know, all these people and like we can do all this stuff. So I mean, there's been a little bit of that for me, but one, I have little patience for organizational change, like as a person, so I get frustrated by it all the time. So that idea, like I hate marathon running, Matt's kind of a marathon runner. He's closer to that than I. Like I like sprints, I like to feel like I'm accomplishing something, so projects to me are often more attractive. And then I can build them up and say they're representative over time of organizational change, and you can line stuff up that way. We did some data visualization around that.
And I think we probably have an interesting attitude, and it probably goes back to like, if anybody saw Tom's hot dog presentation, I'm not really sure like we care if people use it or not. Like we're not out there doing periodic workshops trying to like convince people who don't want to use it to use it. We're here to kind of work with the people that want to use it to make cool stuff.
Yeah.
So I think we're lucky in that, you know, and maybe it's because the number of people using it is already high enough that it justifies its own existence at this point.
Yeah.
But you know, I don't feel like we're out there doing some of the stuff that a lot of other people would do, and you know that makes it easier in some ways to just not care, I guess.
See, I did the force stuff. So in my previous job, I was like in charge of instructional technology for a K-12 school district, right? So I like wrote policy and like went to school board meetings and like I still have PTSD over that. I found it to be the most awful, horrible thing possible. And I swore never again would I be involved in anything remotely like that. In part because you watch like your intent, and then what happens when that is scaled. So that school district had 50,000 students and I don't know, 72 schools. And so you would like try and do something nice and you'd like structure all this thing and think you thought of all the stuff. And then it would immediately become your worst nightmare. And so like, we're not trying to force anyone. I don't even bake cookies for people. Like, I don't do any of that stuff. That works for some people, but I'm just like, you want to use it because it's beautiful and good and we can convince you on that kind of on its own merits. Like, I'm game for that. But like, I don't want carrots and sticks involved if I can avoid it at all. That's not saying like, I mean, bring donuts, make stuff for people, that's fine. It's just like, that's how twitchy and disturbed mentally I've become at this point.
Well, yeah, I don't think so. I mean, because I feel the same way. I spent a long time before I worked here, you know, doing instructional technology training, and it was like to have to sell like respond to lockdown browsers to somebody like this is a good idea. You know, after doing that for so long, I've got no interest in that either. So I think we all kind of occupy that same mental space, and luckily nobody has demanded that we do otherwise yet.
Yeah, and it's like, you want to use WordPress? Great.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of skill in WordPress. We do a million magical things in WordPress. You want to use Google stuff? Okay, we've already used it for email. Like, Google has all our student data. Like, we might as well get some advantages out of it. You know, like, we don't care. Like, honestly, you want to build something weird in Blackboard? I can customize CSS. We can throw jQuery stuff in there. Like, I try not to care anymore. Like, you want to do something? Let's do something. Yes, sir.
I would say I'm like the same, very similar. Like, I want to get stuff done, and so our CIO, he came from IBM into we were like, oh my god, this is gonna be terrible, but it was been great. And one of the things that he kind of talked about there was like the difference between initiatives and projects, and if you can sort of define those things, like this is an initiative, this is long term. Give me a project within that thing and we'll take care of it and divide that up, and I think that can be super helpful too. So you can still be part of this big initiative, but my project, for example, is the tech bar or whatever, that's
right.
I can wrap my mind around that and I can get going on it. But it's hard to make that. He's done a lot of work on campus to say this is an initiative, it's not a project, and like helping other people on campus like kind of understand that too. And I think just that language change sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's really nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know what we would call this thing. Initiative or project?
Initiative that maybe has slowly become a project. So this is Learn RVA, and this is, if there was like a pit of despair of project management stuff that you don't want to happen, this certainly started out as that. And I'll kind of give you some background. So I guess this had been going on for, yeah, so this is one of the first things I started working on when I got at VCU. And so this is like a consortium of Richmond universities, which includes VCU, University of Richmond, Virginia Union University, and a few of the JSARG, and a few of the community colleges around there, as a repository for examples of community engaged learning using the Richmond area. So very neat premise, something that I think we can all get behind. And if we've got some time, we can kind of scroll through and look at a couple of the cool things that people have done. But when you talk about project management, you have immediately, I think I came on there, if we click through like the about, you'll see like the giant list of people that are representatives if we scroll down. So there we go. That was our initial kind of committee. So one, we've got a giant committee of a bunch of different people from a bunch of different universities who occupy kind of totally different spaces in this anomalous swirl where there is really no decision maker. So you can imagine why this kind of spun wheels for 2 years until August, I guess, of 2017, when somebody finally said, oh, it's July, we need a site up, we need this done by August. So this has been something that we've worked on in bits and pieces since arriving here. And I think if I can speak just anecdotally about what has made this process better, it's really cutting out a bunch of these people on this list. Because you can imagine having all these people in a room trying to decide a bunch of stuff about a website that their history faculty, their sociology faculty, they're not web developers. They don't know what best practices are when it comes to developing accessible websites or even functional websites. So what we've really done is it's been helpful that a lot of these people have kind of self-opted out of the process. They kind of had their input at the beginning and then have gone away somewhere. And so I think at this point now, we're down to about a core group of four-ish people that are representative of these different units that we're currently going through a revision process, and this is just night and day different. So just one, getting out all of the people who don't necessarily need to have input or can have input after we've made something has made everything a lot easier to manage from my perspective, especially when it's trying to satisfy all of these stakeholders who, no matter what you do at this point, we've got a list this large, not everybody's going to be happy with what we make, or not everybody's going to like every aspect of it. So,
well, can you talk a little bit about the dual purposes that keep fighting?
Yeah, and so this was a really interesting perspective where they couldn't even agree within themselves. So the idea here was, as I've seen it, the value in this is, hey, we have these people doing these really cool and interesting course projects out in the community. Let's capture those as examples so that people, faculty members, students can look at them and say, I want to do something similar. That sounds great. So what they had the idea of is that to do this effectively, the faculty members need to understand the social and cultural context of Richmond. And so what they've been fighting between is, what is the main focus? Is it the projects that people are doing or the things that they can learn about Richmond, Virginia? And so we have these on that homepage you see, you have these two choices. They're tried to be presented on the same level of hierarchy. And something that we've continually argued back and forth. Should we have this? What's our focus? What is our most important thing? And then at the same time, what we've argued is that all of this information about Richmond exists in better places. So this is what some of these faculty members spent years working on, is developing 2 or 3 paragraphs about the 19th century in Richmond. And it's I think we could just send them to the Wikipedia page of Richmond and they would get better, more useful information. And so just trying to one, point that out in a way that doesn't offend people was hard to do in the beginning. And 2, makes them understand that this isn't necessarily adding value. It was also another difficult kind of hurdle that we had to get over. But I think at this point we've had enough feedback from people. One thing that this group really did smartly is they had some student interns who've kind of worked on this site, and they would be the people who would add stuff to the posts as projects would get submitted. They did some feedback studies with some faculty members, got some users to say, this is what I'm confused about, and we let that data kind of guide us, and that kind of helped me a little bit frame it in a different way. So it's not Jeff's telling you this is a horrible idea, but everybody says they're confused about these 2 purposes, so maybe we should simplify this in some way.
Anyone else stuck in large multi-institutional projects?
Yes, but my recommendation, see if you can cut that down to a core group of people. Whether or not that's possible, that's been really effective. And in the last 2 months with this kind of new core group of people, I feel like we've been able to make more useful decisions than we did in 2 years.
My strategy is to practice lazy consensus. Are you familiar with that concept?
I'm not.
So in order to maintain the veneer of collegiality, to not position myself as the decision maker, I structure those points of decision with large groups around this notion of lazy consensus. I word it such, this is the thing I'm going to do if I don't hear back from you by this date.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That way, if there is a strong objection, everybody has an opportunity to raise it. But if they were too lazy to inform themselves, disinterested, or most often, yeah, that's cool. then it proceeds. And you don't have to wait for those feedback loops to close to stay on your deadlines and hit your marks.
Yeah, that's a solid idea.
Yeah.
And I think something I practice without knowing it on various portions of this.
Do you kind of explain that that's how you're going to do it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, when you're forming your group culture and all of that stuff, Bethany Novisky, you probably know her. She's has been at University of Virginia.
Yeah, I think she's at JMU now.
She's
The Scholars Lab
brilliant.
person?
Yes.
Yeah.
And this was actually something that I learned from a keynote that she did. So we actually look at her blog and say, this is how we're going to
What's the
proceed.
name again? Bethany Novisky.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I really like the distance from Kevin Bacon and the kind of ask about that. How do you then make sure if the decision maker is not in the room, how do you make sure, especially a big institution like I'm at, how do you make sure that that decision-making ability is given to or transferred to the folks who are actually doing the building?
Yeah, I think in this instance, I can only speak in this instance, and I'll let Tom, if he's got something better to say, which he usually does, about this. I feel like with this one, at least, like, I was gonna do it. Like, I'm the one who made this, so it was kind of like, I could pose as the decision maker, whether they really wanted that or not, because eventually, like, I was the one who had to enact all of this stuff.
Right. And so there's like, I don't know, there's like the ethos of the thing maybe, like what's its purpose, which would be a hard role for, I think, for you to assume.
Yeah.
I know, like, I failed before handing this off to Jeff, like a real jerk. I had spent like a number of meetings with these people. That's another thing, like warning sign there. They had face-to-face meetings which are separated by multiple months. And by that time, often new people would be in positions. And we would have to rehab the same conversations. Even though we had notes from the last one that said why we made a certain decision and stuck with it, the new person would insist on revisiting it. Because, you come in as the new person in the group, you kind of mark your territory to a degree in some of these things. And so I could never get them to go like, because there's educating professors about like Richmond, the history, so they can do community engagement. But this was also sort of side pitched as, and when new faculty come in, this will be a place we could go to show them like where their kids will go to school. Like somebody kept like sliding that into the purpose.
And have a Zillow iframe so they
Yeah,
can find apartments.
And so like I never got, and I would be like you can't do that. And I would say that repeatedly, but like the person who could decide that like didn't exist. So I failed to find a person who could do that, and I don't know for some reason if the decision maker really exists at all. It's just like whoever's loudest and most persistent.
Yeah, and I
Willing to take ownership.
Well, and I think in this instance, it really had to come to that because it was literally like June, and they were like, this needs to be up by August 12th. And nothing existed, so it was like, they didn't care at that point because we needed something, and we knew it wasn't going to be perfect, and they just empowered me, I guess, to make certain decisions for them.
Yeah, you may have been the possible sacrificial lamb.
Yeah.
If anyone's unhappy, they can blame Jeff.
Exactly.
Is there though, like you said, that does that idea of quote unquote perfection stop sometimes these projects in their tracks? Like there is this idea that it has to be perfect before you can publish or before launch?
Yes, it does.
Yes. And the histology project here is probably a good example of that. So if you want to run into some people who are very concerned with very small details and very, very particular about those details, I encourage you to work with some histology professors. So all they do in life is stare at the tiniest things around and be very, very meticulous about the way they look. This project was with two of them, one retired, one currently practicing. So that's another interesting thing when it's the person's sole focus work-wise. That leads to some interesting stuff. And then this thing was also huge. It was another thing like that can be kind of messy they built something in Adobe Authorware in like 2008. And they really liked it. and it shaped entirely the way they think about this thing in a way that is permanent and perhaps indelible in all ways, shapes, and forms. So in their head, the web works like this weird authorware thing that was like 600 by 800, always the same size, and was essentially an application that was kind of hard written. So we were transferring the concepts there to a website that would be visible on a phone and other things. And trying to talk them through all this stuff was partly an educational experience and mostly me failing to be able to talk about mobile web design and the complexities of user interfaces in a mobile world. But this site is, 1,400 pages, 7,000 or 8,000 different images, overlays, like even this menu structure itself, I didn't appreciate the complexity of while looking at the product. I mean, like, this is just a monster.
And just to give you all a size of the scale of this thing, to even generate that menu without totally crashing the website, we have to like save it, a representation of it in a flat file somewhere else, because doing it like on the fly would just take forever.
Yeah. And so the way I got around that at first, before Jeff came up with that idea, is I would run it locally on my computer, let it churn through the 5 minutes or so it needed to make the menu, grab the HTML, and paste it into a page. That was my temporary fix. But it gets at this idea of like, one, I didn't realize it was really going to be that big, and all the tiering and nesting just eats up time. So when I was starting this conversation, I didn't realize I was going to have to solve that problem. But in the moment, because I promised, I had to deliver something. And so like it does lead to some creative, although not necessarily best practice thinking to get stuff done. And then it's the kind of thing you can start to iterate on and fix and make better over time. So this thing kicks out a big giant JSON file that we can then use to make this, and it's live and real. And it's the kind of pattern we can then use in other projects. So it does lead to some good and cool and useful stuff. But I wouldn't have known really that this was going to be a problem because I've just never built a menu of this complexity before. So I couldn't have predicted it. Yes?
Do you use project charters or contracts? If
Like
so,
MOUs and stuff?
Yeah. If so, what's your experience been, or not? Why not?
This like has a side MOU because they wrote for like an open source funding thing that's part of our library program that we help with. So it's like open ed stuff. And it has some rules. We do MOU stuff around like some of our online coursework because there's like, I don't know, fees or something. There's some sort of money involved that I stay away from. But we don't on our individual projects ever. And like to me that was fairly intentional just because like I don't like our engagements with these people to be structured around like a contract with what usually are threats of some sort, right? Like, like, or compliance issues, like, and I understand how like people can use it to shape behavior and expectations. And maybe Matt and Jeff wish that I would shape people's expectations with words that could be referred to. But I mean, for the most part, we're trying to make people happy. You know what I mean? And like encourage them to keep working with us and expand that stuff. So usually, like this is a good example too. I think this is the worst idea ever. This slider thing navigates through the pages. I resisted this for a year and a half. But eventually, they wanted it so badly, and said students wanted it. I don't know if that's true. I didn't talk to the students. I just can't imagine anyone navigating by that thing. It makes me sad even to do that. But I did it because they really wanted it. And they're nice people. This probably would have been excluded in any MOU contract I would have written. We would have said, we're going to build this. We will not build novel interfaces for pagination, you know, like, and plus I just don't want to write that stuff anymore, like, you know, and in the end, this is a relationship. If I can't navigate it emotionally and, I don't know, interpersonally, like, to fall back on the documentation feels like I'm giving up. So if I end up giving in, because I really like these people, they're nice, they're like my grandparents at this point, you know, that's, you know, this is recorded. But they're nice, lovely people, and I like at least one set of grandparents. So they're like the grandparents I like. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the balance. Like, I feel like I see a bunch of MOU groups, and they like, at our own institution, and like the relationships they're creating are not relationships. They're contractual agreements between two corporate entities. And they're just looking for a reason to be angry at someone about violating the treaty. And like, I don't want that life. Like, you know, this is a little bit beyond what we said we would do. I don't care. We'll make it work. I mean, I think we like what we do. And even if it's something we don't particularly like, it's not poison.
Yeah, right. I don't know. Maybe it's just that I've never felt like super burned by anybody who's really taken advantage of our nature to do a little bit of extra work if you ask. And I also can like think back on all the examples, at least at VCU, where there was no monetary exchange for what we're doing, where I'm not really sure having something in writing, even if I was like, hey, we said we did this. Like, that's not going to change what this person's going to do or how they're going to behave. I mean, a tree is a tree. They're going to do that the next time that they contact me.
Good point, though. We don't do chargeback.
Yeah.
So that is an entirely different world. If you are like, I'll do this if you pay me that, then I don't see how you have to have those things. But we just are like, hey, would you like some help? Or we think it'd be cool to build this. Do you want to do this with us? Which is a different, I think, starting point. I would have quit if we did chargebacks. Like, I wouldn't have anything to do with it. It's just not how I would want to live. All right, we're pretty near the end, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, you've got 15 minutes
Okay,
roughly
so
for
we
Q&A.
got peer questions. Or we can go into
Maybe
another
talk
project. Like, this one has gone on for a long time. Lots of little details, lots of, you know, things where I thought I understood a pattern, but it turns out I'm not a histology professor, and like I missed a certain understanding of even how they organize their lives. So, I mean, project management certainly wouldn't have saved me here. We expanded and included H5P interactive quizzes. They included, like, it turns out they'd also written a text notebook in Word on histology, and we added that at the last minute recently. You know, so this thing has continued to grow in a way that I think is positive and good, but certainly is outside the bounds of anything we thought about when we started this thing off. I can talk a little bit about this course, too, if it's of interest. I don't know. You want to hear about a photography course? Yeah, all right. This is, I've co-taught this course twice with John Fryer, who's in our art department. So this is kind of like a perfect world too. Like Matt described one version, Jeff described a living hell, and then this is a pretty optimal thing too. Like I'm co-teaching this class and I'm co-constructing like the stuff to support it, and we've run it twice so we can improve iteratively based on the fact that we ran the course before. And it's been, you know, a lot of fun, but I'm really close to the decision maker, because I'm one of them. I get to see the students and the faculty member interact with it directly, and I get to kind of like help them build it. So I mean, like, super awesome. It's about, you know, it's also something I care about. So, you know, we get to do some fun stuff that has evolved. But once again, when I first built it, overcomplicated. And the curriculum, in case you've ever built the course, when it first came out, had too much stuff too. And so it was interesting to see that kind of parallelism. We had too much stuff on the back end, there were too many platforms for the students, but there were also too many assignments for the students. So we really like broke things down and started just saying like, all right, we're gonna have, you know, these challenges. I stole kind of some of that language change from Mike Wesch when he did the AMP 101 thing. I just really liked changing things from assignments to challenges. Just little bits like that. It's kind of fun to be able to do. And we just kind of started compartmentalizing it. You know, breaking these things down into pieces. John Fryer is a photographer. He's not a technology guy, so the back end was really important and making it easy for him to be able to change these things and build on it. And then knitting things together and making it really obvious. Like, can you spot the hashtag for this one? And then lining these things up so that they'll be able to see what's going on and whether it's working. We built in things like, we found students were having trouble seeing if the Google photo album was public or not. So if they paste the right URL in here, it turns green. You know, wouldn't have been on the project scope. Would I have necessarily seen that they had so much trouble submitting a URL and knowing if it was right if I wasn't there? Probably not. So like, how close can you get to the action, and how much can you see is you know?
And I think that's an important point. So if we had like a list of like things you want in an ideal project, that closeness to the person actually using it is really important, because like with the histology thing, right? They said students want X. You have, I mean, you're not going to call them a liar. So, you know, you've got to kind of take what they said at face value, where when you're watching them use it, or when you are kind of embedded within a course, helping them make something or use something, I think the feedback you get is so much more rich and applicable to making the tool better, because you see it in real time.
Yeah, and I think it also has the opportunity to kind of like make you happier.
Absolutely, yeah.
It can be easy to sit from afar and then you only filter up the bad things when people have problems. And like, that's a frustrating way to live. That's central office in lots of places. The only thing that gets elevated is just misery. And so you start to think only miserable things are happening and everything is failing. Do you sense that PTSD again? Yeah. I can smell it. You know, like, and then here, like, if you actually get into a classroom with cool people and do cool things, you can see the good stuff that's working and feel good about it, but also see, here's a little rough edge that I can just sand off. And I think it helps set the expectations for teachers and students as well. When they have beautiful processes, they realize these things don't have to be stupid or like just suffering to turn in a thing. We could make these nice and smooth, and, you know, people say user experience, but it's really just like building nice things for nice people to do the stuff you want. You can smooth those lines, you can grease things down, and it can work the way you intend it. And that's what this one, I think, is getting pretty close to. So we have, you know, the different pieces, things building together. Students were pretty happy this time. We are fusing Instagram, which is evil, with Google Photos, which is equally evil, while using Gmail for our student mail systems. So like, our students are wholly owned subsidiaries of some company, I guess. And I'm not even sure like anymore like how to avoid that. Like, when I think about where servers are running and who sees what data on those servers, even of systems that say maybe they protect your privacy, I don't know how that stuff filters. Like, if all your stuff is on AWS, what does Amazon know about it? You know, There are lots of questions, I think, that this thing keeps kicking over for me, but I don't know, more stuff to think about. Wake up at night, feel bad. Try and take a pretty picture to feel better. There's some nice buildings around. I don't know, any parting shots, questions? I've already gotten 2 good tips, maybe 3. Yes, sir.
One of the things we're toying around with, I want to say we got this from UMW, but maybe with the projects like the last one, saying as part of this, we're also going to run this through our student workers and get feedback on it. So we have direct student feedback.
Yeah.
Whether or not you're telling us your students are saying something, we're going to get it from them. And because we have a crap ton of student workers that we can say, hey, take a look at this and tell us what you think. And that, I think, does resonate with faculty somewhat too. They may think one thing, our students like this, but if you say, all of our students thought this was terrible, maybe they would change their mind.
Yeah, that's nice. We don't have student workers, but for those of you who do, that seems like a beautiful, beautiful way to do it. Maybe we need to recruit some. Yeah.
So what we were experimenting with at UMW, now we have the DKC, but also we were I was working with Heartland Burge, who is the building manager for the HCC, and he had front desk students, and he was always looking for value adds for his front desk students, and not just sit there and count how many people were coming in. And so they could volunteer while they're just sitting there at the desk to do beta testing of some of these sites or digital assignments. So it was a negotiation between, so we didn't have any funding for students at DTLT, so found people who did have money for students and who were looking for other things for those students to do in order to enrich their experience in what they did. So again, it wasn't just they were just sitting there counting who came in, but that they could also spend that time working on some of this stuff. And so we developed a curriculum to help them think about assignment design and interface and those kinds of things. And they did all of that on their time. And sometimes an extra hour or 2 where they weren't at the desk, but getting money from that pool for student aids. So it might be interesting to see, and we were also talking about maybe doing that with library staff, right? So when they're sitting there at the desk and no one's there, they could be playing around or testing these kinds of things, which it's actually probably a good student experience anyways, because probably they're doing it, the students are doing it distracted. So again, it might be that you can find units on campus that do have student aides who have downtime when they're not really doing anything, and propose this as a value add for them to be able to say, like, could we borrow an hour of their time when they're sitting at their desk to be able to go through these websites, and we can, you know, that we can give them an extra letter and it's an extra set of skills that they've acquired. And I mean, even one of the students who I piloted this with, she got accepted into her master's program with funding to be a TA because she had quote unquote pedagogical experience, which she wouldn't have had otherwise as just a straight undergrad or even as the desk person there. So.
Oh, nice. Yeah. That's a good idea.
I can send you the whole curriculum that I developed for it.
Oh, yeah, that'd be nice. Amos?
Tom, this is a question for you, but for everyone. And I don't work at a university or college, but we engage with universities and colleges in all kinds of ways. And in my travels, I've seen a few institutions use a pretty advanced analytics platform called Qualtrics in thoughtful ways. But then I see a lot of them using it as a very expensive interpretation of survey. And so I'm just wondering on the subject of genuinely finding and engaging student voice in purposeful and adaptive ways. Do you know of anyone who's really leveraging that well?
I'll look to the audience. Yeah, I don't. I mean, certainly not at that like 10,000 foot view.
Yeah.
I don't even know if you can really see student voice at that elevation. Like, I think that's what I struggle with is I feel like at scale, the individual voice is lost. That's just the way it works. You can group certain people and maybe understand understand certain things, but I think most scale data is about the institution, not the individual. That even the stuff about like, retention is not about that individual and retaining them. It's about retaining students like them to fix the data and to ensure tuition dollars, right? Like they don't think like, I'm gonna save Jill Smith or whatever. They're like, I'm gonna increase our rates of retention, and I'm going to make sure the university itself survives as an organization.
Yeah, and I'd kind of second that. I mean, like when I feel like I've interacted with students in a way where like I've seen what they think, it's typically at a much smaller scale. When I've been embedded in a course or done something directly with the students. I mean, because survey data is useful, but I remember at one point in time I piloted like task stream e-portfolios with a group of students in an information systems class, and watching those students' depressed, hate and anger-filled faces as they were doing this stuff was more voice than I ever would have gotten from the actual qualitative data. Like I could see that they literally hated this thing. And some of them told me, this is the stupidest thing I've ever done. But it's like they would have never said that. I don't know. Like I'm just not sure how that would have been reflected in some sort of quantitative fashion.
That's what I'm looking for is like from a social emotional point of view, like how are these human beings feeling? And not to do something creepy like what we saw this morning yesterday, but like how do we have an authentic dialogue with the people that keep the lights on and keep coming back?
I think you have to have an authentic dialogue and like look at a person and be like, do you like this?
Yeah.
And have them feel open enough to be like, no, dude, this sucks. This is horrible. I would never use it. Because I mean, I don't know. I doubt that any other methodology like is going to get at that in a way that we're all going to be comfortable with. Because maybe we've got like, sure, if you've got your biometric band on, we can read your serotonin levels. We know you're happy with task stream. But I don't know. Yeah.
The one community that I found that has been doing some interesting things that hasn't figured it all out is this little school system, a K-12 district in California, where they have adopted a protocol of regardless of their initiative, before it launches, they have points where they are going to ask for the reactions. And it's crazy. When you walk through, like, the kids are empowered, they talk about it. And just by virtue of having the invitation to talk, it changes the way that they interact when they're not being invited to talk. And it's fascinating, but I have no idea how to help others do that.
Well, I'm curious, like, who here would feel like their institution would let students veto or approve major initiatives?
Our institution would say they want the student voices and then do what they want to do anyway.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know about the institution I'm at now, but there is, I mean, when I was, and this is a Canadian example, but when I was up at University of Alberta as a graduate student, they took student input really, really seriously and sat on every single major university committee where any of these, including the Board of Governors, Academic Planning Committee, and took the input of the students very seriously. And I sat on all these, so I was president of the Grad Students Association, and was actually really amazed at what kind of influence, and only realized afterwards, I'd never been anywhere else, that this was really like a unicorn. It was really rare that student input was taken as seriously as it was at University of Alberta. But I mean, we raised issues all the time and technology was starting to become a question, and we were starting to really ask the questions, and we were taken seriously. Now that might have just been leadership at the time, and who knows now if it's the same case, but there are pockets and there are universities that do take the student voice very seriously because they have a history of them being embedded in the governance structure and really believe in the concept of shared governance. So.
Anyone see that in America? I'm legit curious because Canada's kind of like, fairy tale land. All these nice people in Canada. Amos is from Canada too.
I'm going to hug you because I graduated from the University University of Alberta.
See?
Oh, yeah.
All right, we're out of time, so we're gonna end with Amos hugging people.
Everybody gets a Canadian green card.
Yeah, and we'll all go to Canada. Thank you.